I know all of you. Hi, Mimi. But I'm Robb Adkins. Our family has been members of this church for quite some time. My wife, Rachel. We have three teenage kids, Maria, Wilson, and Sam. You'll note in your bulletins that this moment of stewardship is to be brought to you by the entire Adkins Ruffalo family, and yet here I am by myself. You'd be forgiven for thinking that perhaps my kids were still asleep, which is unfortunately sometimes true on the weekend, but here is not. You may have noticed Maria, she's the one that came forward with the plate of delicious pancakes. They're busy getting ready for the pancake lunch that we're all going to enjoy in just a little bit, so they have that excuse. But it affords me a very rare indulgence as a parent, which means that I get to stand up here and talk about my family, and in particular my kids, without being corrected or being told that I'm embarrassing or cringy. So what I wanted to share with all of you in this moment of stewardship is about the journey for our family and what this church means to us and why it's so important to support it. And part of that is because, in a very literal sense, our family has grown up in this church. We moved here to Marin in 2011. Our first time in church, in this room, was Robb's second sermon, Robb's second Sunday here at the church. So we've literally overlapped almost entirely with his time here. And as I mentioned this to Rachel this morning, but it's true, is that if you were to describe in one sentence, what our journey at this church has been, it would be that we came for the sermons, but we stayed for the love and the community. That's not to suggest the sermons got worse over time. What I mean is that it became a deeper and more meaningful journey for us, not only with respect to the sermons and literally in church, but outside of it. And in describing that journey, there are a lot of things that we could talk about in terms of how it manifests itself, for our family or for yours, and that turns into a list of things like the Reclaim Weekend, which is great, or the mission trip, or our daughter served as one of the elders, and my wife's one of the deacons, and there's plenty of those that you could talk about. But at least as I was reflecting on what the church means to us, there's a deeper meaning to that for us, I think, than those list of things. And at least for us, it's this: that this church meets all of us, including the children, where they are. And Jeff Shanklin does a better job explaining this than I do, and he was joking with me just before the service as they're getting ready for the pancake lunch. That I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about your youth program. He said, make sure you tell them we don't have a youth program, which is true. What he means by that is youth programs are at their worst, can sometimes be an indoctrination of sorts. You bring the kids into a program, you teach them what it is they're supposed to do, and then what tends to happen is once they go off or college or whatever their life takes them to, it doesn't really bring them back to a spiritual journey. It's sort of packaged and then it's gone. And that's not what this church does, or at least our experience has been. They meet us in where they are in their real lives. I'll give you two examples, just quickly. One humorous and one not. The first one, our son, Wilson, runs track at Tam High School, and he was sitting there in the middle of the field with his friends during a track meet, and he hears a voice behind him, and he says, hey, Wilson. He turns around, and it's Jeff Shanklin. He's there at Wilson's track meet unannounced. He's got a bunch of boba drinks with him. When Wilson and all of his friends, none of whom attend this church, I don't believe, were handed drinks, and Jeff carried out a conversation with them. Now, as a 15-year-old, that'd be awful if I was there, but having Jeff there must have been a surprise. Where his father was at his track meet, I don't know. But this is an example of the kinds of things that Jeff does. I don't know if you know this, but pre-COVID, he used to go over to the middle school with donuts. Being outside this building, being in their lives, where they're actually living their life, I think is important. And it's not just Jeff. There's lots of examples. Mimi taking Maria and her friend and others, Muriel, to lunch or to tea. Getting into conversations after service about the 49ers with Wilson. Lisa, like a lifelong friend of ours, as dear and close to our family as we can have. But there's a relationship through this church that's different and that's meaningful and is deeper, and that's meeting them where they are. The second example, because that sense of community is not just for joyous moments, but also for somber and difficult ones. We'll all, of course, remember the Parkland school shootings from several years ago, one of a terrifyingly long list of these types of incidents that affect our children, of course, in ways and on all of us. You may recall, and this was several years ago when that occurred, but that a lot of the students in the high schools in the Marin area were going to go out on a protest, which would involve, to protest gun violence in the schools, and it involved leaving their classrooms, and they were told by the administration that that would lead to an unexcused absence. This church in the session came together and approved a letter to be sent out to say that this was a spiritual effort by the children, and therefore should be excused. It's meeting the children, I think, where they really live that is meaningful. So we all just got those leaves that everybody handed out, and I was writing on mine. I wrote on one of those leaves teenagers just now, because in a real sense they are bracketed, they are encased, or at least we project upon them a certain narrative that isn't maybe their own. And to sum it up, that's not what our church does. We meet them where they are. And so I would just encourage each of you to think about how the church meets you where you are, with the value in that, and then to consider how you can give to support continuing that in our community. So thank you very much.